We're heading downhill.
Roger.
What's going on in the van? Hello, back row in the van. Uh-oh. Uh-oh. Nope.
Yikes.
Yep,
Hey.
there we go.
Hey,
Hello,
thank you.
van. Give us a wave. Back science row. We'll do the tour again.
What's to the left?
Left is, the door.
Oh, yeah, that's where we come and go.
So the mission control on Nautilus is 2 shipping containers that are side by side and have part of the interior walls removed. So we are cozy in here. Those are the handles that are dogged currently, so people don't come in that door since it blinds everyone. There's a light switch box above Dee Dee's head. Very nice, yes. Air conditioner. Oh, thank you, Russ. Yep, there we go, air conditioner. You have Dee Dee, Russ, and Suna in the back row, and science and data logger seats. Full row of monitors there. And then those units in front of them are the KP audio units, so we can talk to each other. Panning slowly, we have large monitors that everyone is monitoring. Here we go. Middle row, there's me in video seat.
Hello.
Madison in the science communication fellow seat. There's another air conditioner actually on the wall.
There is,
that
yes.
You can't see. It's quite nice.
It's very efficient.
Yes. do 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 do. Do, 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 do. Alyssa's here. Argus seat. And the winch control right here. Very nice. Alyssa, what are you doing with the winch control?
I'm moving Argus up and down so we can stay about 15 meters from the seafloor.
Excellent. Moving over to Trevor, who is in the Herc seat, theoretically. Not physically visible. And
Is he even there?
and Miles. We can see his nose. Hi, Miles. All right. That's the van. There's Trevor's hand. Going back. Alyssa's hand. Sonar screen up on the top right. Kind of cool. Lots of monitors. Oh, what's our monitor count? Does anyone remember the last time we counted? Is it 34?
Totally depends on how you count it. Is the
That's
multi-viewer
true.
13 or is it 1?
Oh, yeah. Let's bump up to see that one.
It's one monitor.
One monitor, yeah.
So it's not. It's 13 screens.
Yeah, I think that's fair.
13 displays. How about that?
But when we did the count during a previous cruise, we even counted these little tiny
I was going to say, like, all these little guys
monitors.
also
Yep.
count.
I think it's between 25 and 35. All right, we'll go back to HIPAC. Theoretically.
Back to high back. There it is.
There it is.
So as we're mapping the seafloor, we're doing a little bit more than just the sonar survey. Suna's back there, as you just saw in her tour, logging things that she sees. And sort of, Suna, what, like, how do you determine what you log and sort of what makes the cut?
I'm trying to log any differences in the topography right now, any interesting objects that show up in the side scan sonar. I also look at the Argus cam and look at the seafloor there and just note the transitions from smooth sand mud only bottoms to more rocky hard bottoms. Any biology I see Also operational stuff, like when we change lines or stop lines, when we're turning, the start of the turn, the end of the turn, directional things. Ship move, Argus move. Anything that happens actually.
And you put almost an entry every minute or so too, right? So it's pretty thorough.
Yeah, I try to. Yeah. When you try to log everything you see or everything that happens, it's mostly like, you're right, like 1 entry per minute, depending on the conditions.
So we have sort of this breadth of observations and records that we're making. So we have the video from Argus. We have the survey information from our side scan sonar. And then we have data log entries. What do we do with all of this information? How do we sort of put it together and, you know, share it out with the rest of the world, aside of just searching for the Samoan clipper?
What we usually do after dives, we go through all of this information, event log, captures, and create a summary of the dive. So we don't have to go through all the video to find out what happened during a dive. Those notes we've been taking are also important because they're all time-stamped, and it helps us a lot to go back and find certain images or targets that we might be interested in the future.
And does all of this information go to maybe a broader database or a place that other scientists can access and use for their research as well?
Yeah, we have a server it can be used by other scientists, and they can the ones who have access to, they can pull out information when needed. They can also request for information that we can send them.
So it's really sort of all shared and collaborative.
Yeah.
That's cool. And to our knowledge, has this part of the world, you know, specifically this survey area, has this been mapped before?
I don't really know. That would be a Miles question.
Miles or DD?
There are probably parts of this area that have been mapped before, but I don't know the extent of it.
My only knowledge is the Okeanos Explorer multi-beam survey that we're using as our base map in the HYPACK screen that was done in 2017. And I believe this is probably the first side scan survey. I'm not sure about ROV dives, but kind of doubtful that there would have been any camera systems put down on this area previous to this.
Yeah, and that mapping mission by Okeanos Explorer in 2017 was done specifically at the request, you know, for this project, with this in mind, that they had an opportunity when they were transiting through the area to pass over the search area and get us a good grounding and show us the lay of the land, what we were going to be facing, and it's really helped in plotting our grid lines.
It's a little bit like a puzzle, right? I mean, when you're looking at world maps and sort of bathymetry and topographic maps of the ocean floor, some areas are very detailed and then other areas are very, very vague. And it's interesting, even to this day, that we have these sort of gaps in knowledge as to where, you know, what the bottom of the ocean looks like, and sort of versus those areas that are very well detailed and mapped out.
I think that's a big part of this overall mapping mission that Ocean Exploration Trust and several other agencies are involved in, right? That to map the world's oceans by 2030. I wonder if there's anybody in the room who knows more about that and could share it.
We actually do contribute, Russ, to that initiative, the Seabed 2030 initiative that was started by JEPCO and the Nippon Foundation to map, as you said, all the world's oceans by 2030. So Nautilus mapping data, as well as the other ships, Okeanos Explorer and Schmidt Oceans Institute Falkor. All of the ships are adding data to that year after year. So actually this season, about half of our season, not this season, sorry, next year, about half of our season will be mapping focused. This year we also spent a good deal of the beginning of the season actually doing mapping off the California coast for the National Marine Sanctuaries. So we were doing some mapping in Cordell Bank National Marine Sanctuary and Greater Farallones National Marine Sanctuary off of Northern California. And we'll actually be visiting both sanctuaries in October to do more of the ROV work there with some of the new maps we created of those areas. So that's a big international effort that you can learn more about by searching for Seabed 2030 on the interwebs.
It reminds me of early maps of North America, right? Where sort of along the eastern coast you could see this very detailed, all of the inlets and bays, and the coastline was super well mapped, and then the further west you went, it just sort of became blank. And that's, in a lot of ways, what we're seeing, you know, slowly but surely kind of filling in those blanks and adding to our knowledge.
Yeah, it's pretty cool looking at the sonar readout right now, and then being able to look at the Argus camera and see the similarities between, you know, what we're reading on the Argus sonar, as well as the downward-looking camera.
Yeah, parts of the ocean that very likely no other human has ever seen before.
My favorite part of old maps, especially very old maps, is all the sea monsters that we're drawn in. You know,
Yes.
here be monsters. We don't really know what's here, but we're going to assume that it's terrifying.
Terra incognita.
Yeah, exactly.
Sam, do you know if the 2020 expedition has been set, or when that'll be made public?
We typically release sort of next year expedition details by the end of the season this year, so
By
fall.
the fall. But what's coming up next in this expedition, after this leg, we are diving in the National Marine Sanctuary in American Samoa. So doing biological surveys and understanding what is rusting below the surface of the ocean. Do we know when or if the Nautilus will be back in the Gulf of Mexico?
Nautilus is staying on the Pacific side, so in 2015, after several years, so from 2008 to 2015, Nautilus was based in the Mediterranean, looking at shipwrecks along the Atlantic coast, down into the Caribbean, and into the Gulf of Mexico. So several years moving through those oceans on that side of the world, and then in 2015 moved through the Panama Canal and has been on this side ever since. And that's kind of the plan for the next few years at least. We've been working through goals set out by in the 2014 Eastern Pacific workshop that Ocean Exploration Trust, which manages the EV Nautilus, hosted with the NOAA Office of Ocean Exploration and Research to kind of set priority areas for exploration for the next 5 to 10 years. So we're kind of working through those goals still. Currently no plans to go to the Gulf of Mexico with Nautilus. However, we are developing a mobile operation system with little Hercules and Argus 2. So smaller versions of big Hercules and big Argus that will actually be deployed in the Gulf of Mexico next year. And that will be in conjunction with our partners through the Ocean Exploration Cooperative Institute that we were just awarded, particularly the University of Southern Mississippi, who operates out of the Gulf.
Cool. But as of now, Nautilus will sort of stay in the Pacific and
side.
doing research over here. Someone wants to know what's the scariest thing encountered so far, and I don't know that anything has been really scary. I think it's all really, really exciting, rather. Felt pretty safe, pretty comfortable, pretty excited about seeing what's what's down there.
There are certainly some sketchy situations, though, right, Trevor? As ROV pilots.
Sure, absolutely. Luckily, we haven't seen any of those this time. But in general, you can run like fishing gear. Fishing gear's a scary one.
Oh, have you? Is that kind of common, seeing that ghost fishing gear?
Yeah, and
Ghost gear.
in fishing areas, a lot of times with like shipwrecks and stuff, you see fishing gear tangled up in there. Yeah, there's lots of times you run into fishing gear and it's tangly and scary. Not scary in the traditional sense of like ghosts and goblins and stuff, but scary in the, this is a multi-million-dollar piece of equipment that I might lose.
Yeah,
Yeah. But we haven't seen any of that on this cruise. Touch wood.
Yeah, we haven't seen any trash either.
Yeah.
That I'm aware of. I'm looking at HPAC on that lower left screen. It looks like mowing away at another lawn.
It looks like the ship is not moving. Or barely moving, and now we can hear the rain on the top of the van.
Actually, our long track distance has been greatly improved by this wind.
Oh, really?
We're now kind of averaging a knot.
One full knot?
One full knot. Wow.
Let's give the folks at home a view of this rain we're talking about. So if you're on the quad channel, you will see back deck with the dome a little damp. Quite a lot of rain coming down currently. Yeah, the port cam is pretty fun too. Let's do that one. Full rain.
Full blown.
Yep.
Yeah, wire cam is almost unusable because it's so wet.
Don't think we have wire cam.
It's not a very useful one to stream most
Oh,
of the time.
no, it's definitely.
Not a very good camera.
Nope.
It's a functional camera, but it's not a very pretty camera.
Oh, wow.
It
Yeah,
almost
we
looks
were.
like it's raining sideways.
Yeah. And we can't even see the island anymore.
Yeah.
Well, wind's come down. Wind just cut it in half.
Ooh.
Oh yeah.
Was it last night?
Are we
Yeah,
through
when
it?
the squall moved through, there was, you could see the wind and the rain blowing sideways, but then it was
Yeah, we're
hitting the
done.
side of the ship, the starboard side of the ship, and coming over the railing.
Oh,
Almost
wow.
like when you're on a plane, you can see sort of the way that wind or water
Yeah.
is moving through the air. There's a term for this. You can see it streaming over.
Yeah,
and
yeah,
it was
yeah.
doing that off the side of the ship. It was pretty cool to see.
Wow, that's super cool. Yeah, it was a wet one yesterday. Looks like it will be today too. So much for my tan.
Yeah, we haven't seen the sun for a couple days, have we?
Yeah,
So we can't go up and down on that.
It was a good rainstorm that first night in Samoa too.
Was.
I haven't seen any lightning though, or heard thunder for that matter. Just rain. Dee Dee, you've done quite a bit of work on shipwrecks as well too. Is that correct?
Yes, I have.
Do you think, is it easier to, I mean, you know, ships are obviously much larger than planes. Is it easier to spot shipwrecks when you're diving for them and searching for them? And then, you know, in doing so, does that allow for these larger intervals between the lines, maybe larger than what we've set on our current side scan sonar?
Yeah, definitely, you know, shipwrecks typically are larger, more, have more structure than an airplane, so they would be easier to locate potentially. Older ones, not so much, as they're more eroded away and could be totally buried. The line spacing is not necessarily based upon what you're looking for. It's based upon what the side scan sonar capabilities are, what its range is, what it can transmit. So line spacing becomes, you know, sort of the same no matter what you're looking for, but you use different technologies such as a magnetometer typically when you're looking for shipwrecks, because there's a lot of metal there, whereas with airplanes, not so much ferrous material, more aluminum, so not as useful.
And then what we're looking at here with our side scan sonar is that top window, or that top sort of level on the port side top quadrant is operating at a different frequency than the lower one. So the top is 600 hertz and the bottom is 300 hertz, and that just allows us to sort of get two different perspectives, right, on the ocean floor?
Yep, the lower frequency can see out further. Sound travels further with a lower frequency sound, so that's why we can set the bottom one at 150 meters on either side for a total of 300 meters that the sonar is seeing, while the top one is a higher frequency, so it has a little shorter range set to it at 100 on each side, so 200 total.
So you can sort of see, you know, parallels in the top and the bottom screen as well, just in terms of, you know, it might be a little bit different size in one than the other, but even when in that black line down the middle, right, I mean, we're seeing the same sort of scallop shaping along the edges, just at a bigger scale or a smaller scale.
Correct. So Argus has been heading down a slope, a little rocky slope, so that's why we've been seeing more features come up on the seafloor.
And then that black area down the middle is sort of a blind spot in the side scan sonar that was intentionally set because we have Argus operating in and capturing the ocean floor with the camera right there. So that's also something that's a little bit unique in this dive, is that we have both the side scan sonar and eyes on the bottom of the ocean. And both of those enable us to potentially, you know, look for these targets and see what may be the Samoan Clipper. Have you been on other dives before where you had both the sonar capability and an ROV cam?
No, it's not really done at all as a normal way of operating. Typically, a side scan sonar is a towfish, sort of a torpedo-like object that is towed behind the research vessel, and all it does is use that sound to send out the signals. We're sort of limited with Argus by our speed that we can travel at, so one of the advantages by not having the camera system is you can travel at a slightly higher speed. So, you know, we have the pluses and the minuses of doing it all. We get to, you know, see the bottom, but then we're at a little slower speed. But I think it's an interesting comparison to have that camera as well as the sonar. And we're still collecting, you know, really good data. So
Right.
while we're going a little slower, nothing has been sacrificed.
Right. And if we didn't have the Argus cam, then that sort of black area down the middle would have been stitched together or closer together.
The black area is typically, you know, about the same. No matter what, there's always going to be that dead space underneath. This is about the average size of that nadir or dead spot, no matter if you had a camera system or not. And the processing of it does take away that black spot, and the lines would have a greater overlap to mosaic them together and fill in those gaps.
Oh, I see. So you'd compensate for it in other ways.
Yes, yes. You'd have tighter line spacing to have sort of duplicate coverage of areas to make up for the gap.
And for those of you that are wondering, we are running those additional lines to the west of our original survey area. So we wrapped up that initially planned area yesterday, and then our research team decided that it would be in our best interest to add a couple of lines, I believe 16 lines altogether, to the west of the original area, just to get a better idea and to sort of utilize all of our resources, since we do have Argus down there. And that area to the west was determined based on some information and the accident report and some reports of debris that had washed ashore at the time. And Russ, I think you have a better explanation of exactly what went into making that decision.
Sure, we just took a look at the coordinates that were provided in the original Bureau of Air Commerce report from 1938, and while the latitude is fairly exact, you know, they provided it down to degrees, minutes, and seconds. The longitude value is only in degrees and minutes. You know, the final value is just 0 seconds, and that just seems a little too convenient, too pat. I mean, I suppose the math could have worked out that way, where it's exactly, you know, 51 minutes even, but it seems more like that's a fairly rough estimate. So if they're being a little more, you know, uncertain in their or a little rougher in their east-west estimation, then we thought, you know, that's the area where we need to concentrate more. And given the evidence that we have from the historical record about where oil and debris from Simone Clipper was observed to be drifting, it seemed to be from the sightings on the Avocet and how the search ship, how they traveled to the northeast, kind of following that trail, and then more than a week later, there was some wreckage that was discovered on Ofu Beach, which is due east of here, another island due east. So if that seems to argue that things were traveling, items, you know, from the plane were drifting to the north and to the east. So we decided we would try and track those back to their point of origin, which would be, you know, logically more to the west. You know, those coordinates were based presumably on observations made at the surface, at what the searchers were finding, and there's of course natural forces that are going to act on those items, that oil and those pieces of debris as they come loose from the wreck and work their way up through the like 2 miles of water, more than 3,000 meters of water in the above the wreck site. So so they very likely arrived on the surface in a different spot from where they left the bottom. So again, the only empirical evidence we have shows things moving in a generally northeast or easterly direction. So we want to track it back to see where it came from. So actually, of those lines, I think half of them are to the west, and then we've also laid some lines to the south. We're going to do these lines on the west side first, and then drop down and tackle some of the southern ones. We, again, because there was that northern component to the drift that was observed by Avocet, and also because that means that the closer we get to the island, the closer we get to the vantage point of the eyewitness. And she was judged to be very reliable, given that she had provided that information before anyone in her village knew that the airplane was missing. So for her to have seen it with the level of detail that she reported, she was just offshore of the island, then anything that tends to bring the accident site like closer to her vantage point seems to make a lot of sense to us as well.
And then based on that eyewitness account and an investigation of the debris field that Navy investigators and the flyby plane and the vessel saw at the time, we do have a general idea and a pretty good idea, of what happened to the Samoan Clipper. And it's believed that there was an explosion. The Samoan Clipper was a flying boat, and so of course it was, designed to float. So are we assuming that this explosion in some way damaged the aircraft in a way that it would have sank, right? It would have maybe separated in parts?
Yes. The investigators concluded that there was an in-flight fire during the course of dumping excess fuel. The exact cause of the ignition was at that time undeterminable, but there was a fire and a resulting explosion in the auxiliary fuel tanks. The Samoan Clipper was specially outfitted for long distance flying, so they had extra gas tanks contained inside the main fuselage, inside the main body of the airplane, where they had taken what would have normally been a passenger compartment, compartment D, the one directly beneath the wing, and converted it and put 6 225-gallon fuel tanks inside. From studying the debris that was collected, the investigators concluded that there was a fire. It seems there was a fire beneath the flooring of that compartment, and then like a sympathetic explosion in the fuel tank area. So logically, that would have compromised the hull at least in that area, depending on the power of that explosion. But probably was quite powerful, because we know that none of the crew survived it. So you imagine that the damage would have been significant. There was debris associated with that compartment, with the compartments immediately adjacent to it, and sections of flooring and wall partitioning, and the navigator's drift target tray, navigational texts, and an officer's jacket with the Pan American logo still pinned to it, that they determined later belonged to the radio operator, Tom Finley. Also a pair of trousers with a bent tie clasp in the pocket that belonged to Jack Brooks, the assistant flight engineer. So yeah, so that the witness described the plane, as having flown overhead. She could smell the gasoline after it passed, and then it turned out to sea and was flying away from her when it suddenly dove for the ocean. And then just above the surface of the water, there was a flash and a detonation and some smoke, and she saw the wings at the surface for a time, and before they sank from sight. And so the investigators concluded that Music very likely detected the fire. He knew they were in danger. He knew that he needed to get down quick. And Simone Clipper, being a flying boat, it was possible to land, at sea. And of course, you could ditch as Sully Sullenberger demonstrated, you can ditch a land plane in the water if you need to as well. And it was at that moment, in that crisis, it was imperative that they get down as quickly as possible. And so they, in the words of the report, they believed that Music had begun and perhaps even nearly completed an emergency landing when they were overwhelmed. And so, I mean, seems again very much in character with what we know about Music and his ability and his character, that right to the last he was trying to save his crew and very nearly dead.
The witness was close enough to the plane at the time as well to smell gasoline.
When it flew overhead, yes. Like, so she saw it approaching Pongo Pongo, and then it circled back and flew east to west across the mouth of Fangasa Bay, and that's where she had just left in her boat, and it flew directly overhead and trailing gasoline behind it, in the process of dumping. So as it flew overhead, and I imagine, maybe 1,000, 1,500 feet, they probably wouldn't have been much lower than that, because they still needed to clear the ridge, which is at 800 feet above sea level. So they needed to clear that ridge in order to land in the harbor at Pongo Pongo. So, 1,000, 1,500 feet, they fly overhead, dumping gas all the way, and she smells it after they're passing, and they continue flying west in the direction of Apia, and then the plane makes a wide turn out to sea, and apparently, our methods of measurement, miles and so forth, didn't mean quite as much, certainly at that time, to the witness. But so they just kind of roughly estimated it as, like, between 5 and 10 miles from her position. They, the plane, dove for the water, and she observed it, appearing to land, and then the explosion occurred, right, seemingly right at the surface of the ocean. So, that would tend to limit the spread of the debris. It didn't explode in midair. It didn't explode, at high altitude and spread itself over the sea and impact the water and cause, further damage there. It was relatively low altitude and low speed, it seems.
The whole chain of events as well started just about an hour into the flight, and the crew, Simone Clipper, was heading towards Auckland, New Zealand.
Yes.
In this inaugural mail route.
Took off on the morning of January 11th, 1938, on the final leg of a trip. Yes, from they had actually originated from Honolulu. They had picked up the mail there. The mail had been delivered to them in Honolulu, and then they had taken it from there to Kingman Reef, and then on the following day to Pongo Pongo. And they were there overnight, and then were departing at about 5:30 in the morning on the 11th. And in fact, the logs of the USS Avocet, which was just tied up at the Naval Station Wharf, like they make note of that, PAA, Pan American Airways, PAA Clipper took off, 0530. And yeah, about an hour and 19 minutes in, the Clipper radios back that they've detected an oil leak in the number 4 engine, which is the right outboard engine. So Simone Clipper had four engines, and so the number 4, the right outboard one, developed an oil leak, and Music prudently shut it down. And their intention was to fly to Auckland, which was a distance of 1,800 miles, and they had left Pongo Pongo with 2,300 gallons of fuel on board in order to make that flight. So they were very heavily loaded, in addition to 751 pounds of mail and Air Express cargo. So yeah, it was deemed safer at that point. They weren't all that far, and they weren't all that long into the flight, so it was better to turn around rather than try and continue on 3 out of 4 engines. He wanted to turn back and return to base. And they took their time, though, and they know they needed to burn off some of that fuel, and apparently Music wanted to scout alternate landing possibilities. So the plane was sighted next over Apia, in what was then Western Samoa, which was a trust territory of New Zealand at that time, and now, of course, is an independent nation. They were sighted there, and then departed in the direction of Pongo Pongo, which was only about 75 miles flying from there. And as they were approaching, they contacted the Pan American base at Pongo Pongo and informed them starting at about 8:27 that they intended to dump fuel. The harbor at Pongo Pongo is quite restricted. It's wonderful, especially for shipping. The natural harbor has has kind of a boot shape to it, where you sail in the entrance, and and then along the foot, there's a turn, and so that the inner harbor is quite sheltered and very calm waters, and it's protected by these gorgeous, towering mountains, ranging from 800 feet up to the Rainmaker, 1,700 feet, kind of towering looking over the entire harbor, which makes it a haven for ships and travelers, but is a real challenge for a pilot, even one of Music's ability. So he had done that he'd made that landing 5 times previously, and every time it was described as hair-raising.
Mm-hmm.
They would have to approach from the north and over this 800-foot ridge, and then dive very steeply for the water, and then in order to set down with enough room to bleed off their momentum and stop.
And it looks
within the calm water.
Yeah, we have a visual of that harbor on that bottom left screen.
Oh, great.
Yeah,
great.
so you can sort of see.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah,
yep.
this boot shape, and that ridge would be that sort of top western edge, right, where the mouse is right
there's
there.
the cursors going over it right now. So yeah, so you look at that and you think like, well, logical. Well, why doesn't he just come in from the south? I mean, there's a big opening there, and just come in. And the issue is that one, you don't want to land in the swells, and like so that entering area, is going to have the ocean swells, the big waves coming in there, and we felt that like when we made that turn in Nautilus when we left the harbor.
Yeah.
You could just feel it start to lift the ship as we made that turn. So you want the calm water, where you'd have to make a really sharp left turn, to line up on the really calm section. And the problem then becomes you start quickly running out of room, and if you're in a plane, and a flying boat at that, like you're vulnerable to anything you know, that might strike the bottom of the plane, you know, on landing. And this isn't a maintained runway. You know, it's a busy harbor, so there could be people who aren't anticipating a plane to be coming back at this time, and they've got their business to do. They're you know, on their way to market or to, you know, go fishing, and they're sailing across your landing area when you arrive, or a tree has been washed into the harbor and is floating there and is an obstruction that you can't risk hitting. So you can't land. You have to go around. But now, as you look at that harbor, you're hemmed in on 3 sides by towering cliffs, and you may not have the power to escape and get enough altitude to climb out of there, and especially in a plane that is now underpowered. You know, he's flying on 3 engines, not 4, and the airplane is loaded down with fuel to make this 1,800-mile flight. So the only choice really is to come and approach from the north and come down over that ridge and land in the calm water, and then if there is a problem, if there is something obscuring the landing area, you have a chance to escape out out at sea level, out through the main entrance. So yeah, that's the challenge that was facing them, and Music elected, even though it was he knew it to be dangerous as well, to attempt to dump fuel, and something happened in that process, and it's, you know, pure speculation as to what. I mean, we just know that it certainly did happen, you know, while they were in the act of dumping the excess gasoline from the airplane. The radio operator, you know, when he signed off, you know, indicated he was going to shut down the set because, again, they didn't want to risk the chance of a stray spark set igniting the fuel vapors that might collect in the airplane during that process. And but something else must have resulted in that, so that, you know, the speculation, there's a number of different causes that have been proposed. At the time, a lot of suspicion was focused on the engine exhaust, that the dump valves were flush with the underside of the wing, and just, you know, you pull a lever and this spring-loaded valve would open and just allow the fuel to run away, drain away by gravity. But an unfortunate side effect they determined later was that the vortices created by the airflow over the wing would tend to push the fuel back and direct it back onto the wing and even into the airplane, into the inner spaces of the wing and down into the cabin of the airplane. So the chances, you know, there's a chance that it could have been carried forward and made contact with the hot exhaust of one of the engines and set fire to it that way, or could have been the flap actuators, electrically driven flap actuators being activated prior to landing, though it seems a little early to be doing that during the dumping process. So you know, some kind of static charge perhaps, or something that caught my attention was that, since we know the airplane was in the process of dumping fuel, and you know, they had to lose quite a bit of weight, and there was a lot of fuel carried in the center section of the airplane, and those, we got one diagram from the Igor Sikorsky Historical Archives, and there's a diagram of the fuel system specifically for the S-42B, and it notes that there is no ability to drain the tanks directly from the center hull section. So you have to tap into the system that exists that was already existing there for the standard construction of the airplane, which is to carry all the fuel in the wings, and the dump valves are in the wings. So in order to lighten the ship of the fuel in the center section, you have to first pump it out of there and up into the wing tanks and then overboard. And so we know they were in the process of doing that, of dumping the fuel and perhaps then pumping it out of the center section and into the wing tanks. And the accident report notes, that there had been fire present in that center cabin where the fuel tanks were, and specifically on the flooring. And I happen to notice that in the fuel plan, the fuel system plan, it also indicates that beneath the floor of that compartment there was a fuel pump that had both a manual and an electric pump. And when you're trying to move a great quantity of gasoline, it seems logical to use the electric pump to do that. But perhaps if there was some fuel that had collected in the bottom of that compartment, and what amounts to the bilges of the airplane, in the hull section, the boat section of it, that maybe the shock of landing and takeoffs had worked some leaks, even just small leaks into those center tanks. And if that fuel had collected in the bottom along the keel, just the vapors themselves, the fuel vapors, are the more volatile, more dangerous of the whole thing. So that if there's some kind of unshielded electric motor in there, and even just a momentary stray spark could have been enough to detonate the fuel vapors that may have collected and then ruptured the fuel tanks and set off sympathetic explosions that destroyed the airplane. So.
And those are clues that we're hoping, finding the wreckage could maybe help lend a little bit more information just in terms of investigating, what the wreckage looks like, and sort of the integrity and the structure that it is now could hopefully help us to determine, what exactly happened.
Exactly. If we could find the wreck, we could study it and in a way that the the investigators at the time, would have wanted to do. It's the last piece of the puzzle that they couldn't fit together. They had determined pretty well, where it had happened, and they had a good idea what had happened, but exactly what the causes were, they couldn't say, they couldn't speculate. That was reluctantly left a mystery. And perhaps if we could still be so fortunate as to find the wreck, we may be able to reveal those clues. Especially at least in the sense of where so much suspicion had been fallen on the wings or the engines. Did the hot exhaust set off the fuel? And so if we were to find it and find that there was scoring and scorching along that one of those near one of those engines on that upper wing, then that would lend credence to that theory. But if the wings are untouched, then we'd have to look elsewhere for the causes.
And sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, and maybe if we find sections of that center hull, like you could tell, by how the metal is deformed. Did it bend outwards? Was there some sign of an explosive force that pushed out and ruptured the hull of the plane?
Right. So we'd be able to sort of pinpoint, where this exactly happened.
Yeah. Yeah.
Interesting. One of the questions that came up yesterday in an interaction was, there are so many of these occurrences throughout history, and whether it's a shipwreck or a downed aircraft, that there is a bit of mystery, what happened and why of all of these do we care so much about the Samoan Clipper. And I think there is this element of, personal connection. It was a crew of 7 men who had families and who were at the forefront of aviation at the time, sort of leading the way and being these pioneers, and really helped to get commercial airways to what they are today. But there is also this ability to take what we learn here and maybe apply it to other wreckage sites, or and to help inform how to find them and what sort of detective work needs to go into determining what happened.
Yeah, I mean, there's a number of factors that went into choosing this site. You know, there were some practical concerns about you know, where Nautilus was going to be operating in the future, and what targets of opportunity. You know, that was part of the big workshop that was held in 2014, with hosted by Ocean Exploration Trust and NOAA's Office of Ocean Exploration Research. And yeah, I mean, it was you know, they wanted to look at areas that were priority for exploration, and look at where there was overlapping areas of interest, and so, you know, on a practical matter, that, you know, there's a lot of important work that can be done in the the National Marine Sanctuary of American Samoa. Were other targets of interest, like, you know, Jarvis and Kingman Reef, and you know, that led Nautilus down to this part of the world. There are other sites that they want to be visiting on their journey back. But so this was an opportunity that presented itself, where there's a historically significant, you know, wreck that's going to be, you know, in this case, just a few miles from an area that we knew that Nautilus was going to be operating. And then, you know, for us, for Airsea Heritage Foundation, I mean, this is what we do, and this is what we love, and that, you know, this is a site of tremendous historical significance to aviation, and as you're saying, to the development of air transport, and this, you know, this pioneering age of you know, transoceanic travel. And, you know, the airplane itself was very innovative, and there are no examples that survive, you know, anywhere in any collection or museum anywhere in the world. So there's a lot of that goes into it, and I think, you know, but there's kind of the deeper thing that goes beyond that, like the why do we care, you know, at this point, and that just goes kind of more deeper into the why do we explore, you know, and I think that's part of who we are, that we're driven to find the answers. And if we stop that, then we stop moving forward, and we stop caring, you know, for each other as well. You know, and that's just maybe more of a deeper kind of philosophical thing, but that I feel like, you know, we should care. We should care about what happens to you know, our fellow humans, and to the, you know, these 7 men who were, you know, who had, as you mentioned, had families and had loved ones who cared for them, and colleagues who respected them and cared for them, and we want to tap into that it does matter what happens to all of us, and so we should never give up on that you know, no one left behind. And so that even here, you know, 81 years later, we're still, when we have this chance, we're going to take it. We're gonna and we don't stop looking, and don't stop caring, you know. And this just happens to be the field where you know, we have our level of expertise and can pursue it. But I like to think that happens, you know, in all aspects of our life and our society, that we all are, you know, looking out for one another in some way. So, and this is just the way that we've found to express that.
That was very beautifully put.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, and very true. For those of you that are just popping on, I'm looking at the world map. We have a couple of new visitors, including Saudi Arabia, Mexico, Italy. We also have American Samoa just neighboring us, a couple miles nearby. Denmark, Netherlands, Sweden, Finland, New Zealand, Germany, Canada. Hey, Portugal just popped on. The UK and the US. So welcome. We are still conducting our side scan sonar survey of the bottom of the ocean. So we finished up our initial survey area just yesterday, and based on the data that we found and an analysis by our researchers, it was determined